myself, because we've got quite a lot of new audience. We've got a lot of the old stand fast from back in the day when we used to hold these webinars in a council chamber at Welwyn Garden City, we just think they're quite successful, but they're really taking off in this online format, and it's fantastic. So welcome to all you who keep coming back. Must be doing something right, and welcome to the people far and wide who are joining us for the first time, and I hope you find it worthwhile and you hook in again to future events. Yeah, I'm Trevor Clements. I'm head of business development for Hertfordshire Building Control. I'm a surveyor. As my boss will tell you, I'm a technical guy at heart, pretty useless at business development, he might tell you. But that's what I'm into. And my colleague, who you might have seen earlier, that's Rachel, our marketing executive. She's going to be on all the background buttons to make sure this all runs smoothly. Hopefully smoother than last time, because 2 seconds before we cracked on, the speaker lost sound, and we started to panic. Anyway, we're good today. So without further ado, let's talk to you about today's subject, which is to give you the latest on the Building Safety Bill. That's the main meat of it. Then we're going to quickly talk about the latest on the Future Homes Standard, and that involves the forthcoming changes to approved documents, L&F, new building regulations. The very last bit, we're going to invite my MD, Simon Hayward, in just to quickly talk to you about the Building Futures Conference that's taking place soon, for anybody who might be interested in that. So starting with the Building Safety Bill and an update on how things have moved on since last year. So the bill has now been published, as we know, and is waiting royal assent. So all the parliamentary process that goes with that. And meanwhile, there's ongoing drafting of the secondary legislation, and we're expecting a detailed transition plan towards the end of this year. And the government has said that this complex bill will create lasting generational change to the way residential buildings are constructed and maintained. As we said in our flyer, the biggest change in a generation. Certainly it's the biggest change since I started in building control as a 17-year-old Sprog surveyor. So presenting today, we're going to talk about the bones of the legislation, because that's all we've got at the moment. And let me tell you, there are a lot of bones to consider. So we're waiting on a lot of secondary legislation that will put some meat on those bones. And the final format is 147 clauses, 9 schedules, split broadly across 6 parts. And the 6 parts are, as you see, part 1 being an introduction, part 2 covering the setting up of the new national regulator, more on that later. I'm going to be saying that a lot today. Part 3 amends the Building Act 1984 and covers the registration of building inspectors. That's an old-fashioned word, isn't it? Part 4 sets out the scope for high-risk buildings and the new duties that relate to them. And part 5 covers other provisions such as the new Homes Ombudsman Scheme, the regulation of construction products, registration of architects, and new powers for residents. Finally, part 6 details the transitional arrangements and covers a few other loose ends that I won't go into. Now, in a previous briefing, some of you may remember I mentioned comments from the Parliamentary Scrutiny Committee about the draft bill, and that were particularly relevant to the Building Control Service. And this was recommendation 21. And the committee said that we recommend that duty holder choice be removed entirely from the building control system. Wow, that's a radical step, isn't it? And it be replaced by a system of independent appointment, and that this be made explicit either in the bill or in secondary legislation to be published alongside it. Yeah, pretty groundbreaking stuff. Well, I think most of us in the know anticipated it wasn't going to happen. The government felt that the introduction of new rules to oversee the competence of building control professionals being sufficient. What you see there is paragraph 423 of clause 43 that amends the Building Act to require that building control authorities, I'll read it, and registered building control approvers must obtain and consider the advice of a registered building inspector each time they want to make a decision on a restricted function, i.e. going about the role of building control, checking plans and checking work on site. For building control authorities, in the case of failure to use a registered building inspector to carry out restricted activities or to seek advice from a registered inspector, their building control decision could be called into question and subject to judicial review for failing to follow the legislative process. So we're going to need to employ surveyors who've demonstrated their ability to work on the different grades of buildings that we cover. And we, as you know, we cover everything from the 30-storey block of flats to Mrs. Bloggs's rear extension. Anybody involved in those schemes can have to demonstrate they're competent to do so and be independently accredited for that. As many of you in the audience know, my building control colleagues, the recruitment market is as difficult as it has ever been in the last 30 years, and it's never been easy. And I'm a bit concerned that whilst this is a sensible provision, don't get me wrong, it could result in an even bigger shortage of building control surveyors. You know, it's right, we need to sort any chaff from the wheat, but we do need to have enough wheat left to go round. So in saying that, it does play to the strength of larger building control organisations like Hertfordshire Building Control, where you've got a high number of surveyors, you've got a greater resilience, and organisations like us that have an ongoing commitment to recruiting and training apprentices and graduates, so we're able to refresh this resource, and these people can take advantage of the career development pathways that are available to them. That's been quite a long experiment for us, and it's still going, but the outcome's looking very promising. You might notice a QR code just up there, and you know, if you or you know people who are interested in maybe going into considering a building control career, even if they're already in another construction career, you know, give it a click and have a look, because we're always interested in talking to people. You know, we do have a system in place to bring people on and give them a rewarding career. Anyway, enough of that. That's not what you signed up to hear about. Let's move on with the Building Safety Bill. So in addition to these new rules for our surveyors, the new Act will also place duties on those who procure, plan, manage and undertake building work. And these duty holders will be required to actively consider and manage building safety risks throughout the commissioning, design and construction processes. So they need to ensure that their designs, as well as the building work, comply with building regulations requirements. And they're the three main roles for the construction process: the client taking the responsibilities, the principal designer and the principal contractor. So effectively what it's doing is it's placing additional building safety responsibilities on the duty holders that are identified in the CDM regulations that came in 2015. So there you've got the principal designer. Obviously they would need to plan, manage and monitor their design work to ensure that if built, it complies with the regs, and ensure that all their designers in their team, they all cooperate and communicate to that end. And they also communicate, of course, with the client and the principal contractor. And the principal contractor, of course, appointed to be in control of the whole project during the construction phase, and similar duties to those of the designer, but of course in relation to the building work rather than the design work. This is a useful slide. You might want to print screen it because it's quite a good reference. It's illustrating when the secondary legislation is expected to be introduced following royal assent. And then that's followed itself by the transition to the main regime, which concludes 18 months after royal assent, all being well. So I won't go through it in great detail, but as you see, the bill was published in July of this year. So it could take between 9 to 12 months from that date to get royal assent, just to get to that point where it becomes an act. So suggesting that the legislation, assuming it survives, will come onto the statute book and become the Building Safety Act between April and July next year. From then on, there will be ongoing introduction of the secondary legislation, including in relation to changes to the Defective Premises Act, which will extend time limits in that legislation, changes to residence panels, amendments to the fire safety order, new rules for architects registration, power for regulation of construction products. I'll touch a bit on those things later. The transition to the new regime will take place over the following 6 months from enactment, so that by 18 months after receiving royal assent, i.e. we're talking towards the end of 2023, most of the provisions should be in place. And at that point, we'll have the other gateways that we've been told about, gateways 2 and 3, which are in place at the building regs approval stage, and then at the completion and handover stage. So there's no desperate urgency. There's still a long way to go and a lot of water to go under the bridge. But watch this space, and Hertfordshire Building Control will be able to tell you as it develops. So we already have a draft of some secondary legislation, so I thought I'd let you have a quick look at that, to the bill. This is the Higher Risk Buildings Regulation 2021. And what it's doing is it's defining higher risk buildings as those with at least 2 residential units, and that includes care homes and hospitals as well. And whilst it does include care homes and hospitals, it does exclude them from Part 4 of the bill that you might remember relates to the ongoing control of occupied buildings. So I think they're seen as being professionally managed and not needing that that sort of scrutiny once they've been occupied, whereas flats will come under Section 4, Part 4. So this legislation gives the definitions for care homes, hospitals and residential buildings. It specifies how height and the number of stories should be determined. As we know, the building height for in-scope buildings, i.e. high risk buildings that are over 18 metres or more than 7 stories or more. I nearly got that wrong. 7 stories or more, and that's covered in the bill itself. That's an arbitrary height, isn't it? You know, why do they hang their hat on that one? A lot of people are saying that could change. There's a few fire officers out there probably got some good informed opinions on that, because I think 11 metres is probably a height which might be more appropriate. That's a height I think I'm right in saying, and feel free to shoot me down on the chat if I'm wrong, but that's where external firefighting gets very difficult after 11 metres, you know, in terms of the modern equipment used today. I nearly said don't shoot me down in flames, but that would have been a terrible pun, so I'm glad I didn't say that. Anyway, it's you know, talking about all this 18 metres and this sort of thing, and flats and high risk buildings, it's easy to confuse the new rules with rules that have been in since December 2018 for buildings over 18 metres containing flats. We've been applying those for some time now, and as you know, that has been quite problematic in insisting that facades only contain, or nearly all materials are non-combustible A1 or A2 class materials, which has had its challenges for as anybody involved in those sort of buildings will know, which I won't go into because time doesn't permit, but it's been interesting. A few key sections in the finished bill. So you see there, we're extending the limitation period on the Defective Premises Act, which was 6 years, is now going to be 15 years. So in other words, this is the time in which a homeowner has a right to look for compensation. Time will tell how that might influence an already difficult insurance market. And also, we're going to have to look at how there may be implications for the liability of local authorities. You know, this will all affect the insurance market in a bad way, and we don't need it to get any more tricky. That's for sure. The bill also enables building owners to levy a building safety charge on leaseholders Now, there were changes made from the original draft so that this charge can only cover the ongoing costs of the new regime. They can't use it to cover historical defects in the building to carry out remedial work. So that's the building safety charge on leaseholders. There's a lot of money involved here because there's also requirements for building owners to consider alternative funding. If they're going to place charges on leaseholders, they must firstly demonstrate that they've explored all reasonable options for raising the cost of remedial works by other means before making a charge to those leaseholders. So there may be government grants available, there may be warranties attached to the buildings, there may be a potential for litigation whereby that money can be raised without making a charge, and that is now mandatory that they consider that. Next one is the establishment of a building safety levy, another charge made against developers in England, this is, at the moment, to contribute to the national regulators' costs in dealing with high-risk buildings. Somebody's got to pay for all this work, and it looks like they'll carry the can. And also a new consolidated infrastructure levy. So that's going to replace the existing community infrastructure levy and the Section 106 planning obligations. Those are going to be combined into one infrastructure levy. A few more key sections. Allowing the regulator to collate a register of higher risk buildings is one of those, and requiring that the principal accountable person for a building must appoint a building safety manager unless he or she has the competence to undertake that role. And by competence, that will have to be proven. There will have to be some sort of examination and qualification process yet to be set up for those roles. You know, these are new professions in the making. Duties are also attached to residents of high-risk buildings. It's not all one-sided, and there will be a general duty not to significantly increase a building's safety risk, and there will be penalties for any residents that do, and that would include non-resident flat owners coming under those powers. So it would give power for the building's accountable person to serve notice to require repairs and remedial work that have implications for fire safety. I think it will also give owners far more rights of access, so they can carry out assessments of buildings and fire risk assessments and things like that, which were very much needed. And finally, there'll be a new regulatory framework for construction products. That's a sector that, as anybody who's been listening into the public inquiry into the Grenfell fire will see, that sector came in for a lot of flack during that, and you've got to say rightly so in some cases. So there will be far more scrutiny over that, the people testing the materials and the people marketing the materials. This is Gateway 1. Sorry for the slightly humorous image there, but I just thought, I saw that and I thought, yeah, that I've worked with a lot of planning officers in my time, all of them lovely people, happy, smiling, welcoming you in. And so I thought that's got to be the one for this slide. So this is Gateway 1. It was introduced in advance of the bill being enacted because it utilised existing planning law. There was already the law there to bring in that requirement. And it came in as you see, 1st of August 2021. So we know what buildings need to pass through Gateway 1, and there they are. Buildings containing 2 or more dwellings or educational accommodation, and with a top story more than 18 metres above ground level, or with 7 or more stories. So when we talk about educational accommodation, that's meaning residential accommodation for the use of students at a boarding school or a university. And when we're measuring that 18 metres, we're doing that's measured from lowest ground level against the building to the highest story in the building. That doesn't include plant areas where people don't normally go. As mentioned, the scope may change, and we'll keep our ear to the ground on that. This is relating to full planning applications, not outlined, they're exempt. And the other gateways 2 and 3, construction stage and then completion and handover stage, will be introduced much later on, as you saw from the schedule in a previous slide. So on those buildings, to go through Gateway 1, planning must consult for the provision of a new building that's in scope, the development of an existing building so that it becomes in scope, or is already in scope and is being developed, and development within the curtilage of a relevant building, because as we know, the changes can be made that have an effect on access to the building for fighting a fire in the building. You know, Grenfell taught us that, and lessons learned, too late in that case, unfortunately. So what will applicants have to do? Well, they'll be required to submit a short and concise fire safety statement to planning. It's similar to an access statement, if you know what they are, and won't be anywhere near as detailed as a fire safety strategy. That comes later. That's the sort of thing that we need at Gateway 2, and building control would be scrutinising that. But this is something a little bit more simple. And as you probably know, the consultant role will be taken on by the new national regulator when set up. So at the moment it's the HSE, but it will go to the new regulator. Bit more about fire safety statements. It's a form that must be publicly available, so it'll be on part 2 of the planning register. It will either be a standard form in a sort of dynamic format, so with an electronic format with drop-down menus, so it's very easy to complete. But for anybody who wants to make a hard effort of it, they can print it and fill it in by hand if necessary. It's recommended that they be completed by a, get the inverted commas up, suitably qualified engineer with relevant experience, registered with the Institute of Fire Engineers, or a competent professional with demonstrable experience. So yeah, time will tell how you pin down that definition as to who is suitable, but it will have to be done. It supposedly only covers safety issues relating to land use planning. We're always told this is going to be nothing to do with building regulations or fire safety order compliance. A bit more of that in a moment. The other thing, it was always intended to be focused and concise. So all the complexity will come in the later stage fire safety strategy. Here's a list of what is covered in the statement, and you building control colleagues out there, take a look through that and you say, well, hold it, that's what we cover. That is relevant to building regulations. You know, things like site layout, access to the site, water supply, it's there. There's a section on balconies, the combustibility of the external wall system. Well, of course, it's Regulation 7, isn't it? It's the what we were talking about, changing in 2016. It deals with the evacuation strategy. We need to know that. The fire safety design code that's being adopted, be it BS 9991 or approved document B, obviously fundamental to building control. Automatic fire suppression, accessible housing in terms of Part M compliance, whether it's a wheelchair user dwelling or an adaptable for wheelchair user dwelling. Section on vehicle access and water supplies, the need for a fire service plan. Hydrants, dry risers, wet risers, access points to buildings. I could go on, but I won't. But these are all things that are allied to building regulations compliance in terms of B1 and B5 in particular. So that's the bones I was mentioning on the building safety bill. Before I move over to a few slides on the Future Homes Standard, just a quick slide showing the proposed setup of the new regulator. You see he's got 4 strings to his bow. I can say he because it is a he. We've been told, well, he's already imposed. Peter Baker, who was already with the HSE, was appointed as the first chief regulator of buildings. And this is what he'll be doing. So he'll be overseeing the performance standards of the building control profession, looking over our shoulder, overseeing the competency of the construction industry. So all those duty holders, the individuals and organisations with statutory duties under the new legislation will be regulated by him. And he'll be coordinating the Building Advisory Committee. That's a new organisation that will replace BRAC. That's the Building Regs Advisory Committee that used to exist. And of course, there's the big new role as the regulator for high risk buildings, working with our good friends at the Fire Rescue Services and with local authority building control to assess schemes at gateways 2 and 3 and open that gate for people, hopefully, when things are seen to be compliant. He'll also, of course, be dealing in the ongoing regulation and control of those buildings after occupation. So HSE, they gave it to them. They did, my experience, and you know, I just can speak from my neck of the woods and my own experience, but they never came across as an organisation brimming with spare resource, if you know what I mean. So they're probably going to have to lean heavily on the support of local authority services, building control, environmental health, fire brigade, because they will need that expertise. And fortunately, we have it and can provide it. Not all will, unfortunately, but there'll be enough to go around, I'm sure. So just a few slides now before we conclude covering the Future Homes Standard. This is coming in 2025, and it's a big step towards the government aim of net zero in 2050. And I know our little Scandinavian friend said blah, blah, blah to that, but I'm going to take it seriously, and we're going to do our best to do our bit towards that aim. So here's a slide showing the implementation timeline. In December this year, we expect the uplift of current standards to result in amendments to the building regulations with new interim approved document L and approved document F published in advance, plus an all new approved document covering overheating, more in a bit. The new standards will come into force in June next year, with the aim of reducing carbon emissions from new homes by 31%. So that was the more ambitious target that the government went for in the final document. There'll be a 12-month transition period from then, i.e. any applications received before this date must start work by June 23. So up to the bar coming down, you've got a year's grace to start the work. But something to take on board here, this applies to individual buildings. So that might be a house or a block of flats. You just can't start to build one unit in a residential development of 50 and expect it all to apply, have to comply with old regs. Anything not started in that 12 month will have to come under the new requirements, and there'll be, you know, that will be quite onerous. There's going to be quite big implications in meeting those new standards. So a full technical specification for the Future Homes Standard will be consulted on in 2023. So that will be another approved document L at that time, and then the necessary legislation being introduced in 2024 to be implemented in 2025. And at that point, we will not be expecting to see any fossil fuel heating in new homes, which will be zero carbon ready. And by that, I mean, there's no retrofit needed. They are just waiting on the grid to convert over to low carbon generation to become zero carbon. And so there's the timeline. a little bit more on the bigger changes. That will be approved document L this year. Anytime soon, hopefully, we will see that new approved document printed. And we'll be doing a future CPD event. So if you did enjoy this one, we'll be doing another one, a bit more technical as well for you. So I'll enjoy that more and cover it in more detail. And hopefully at that time, the document will be printed so we can be absolutely precise in what we're telling you. So just what it will do is for new homes, it will there will be a new SAP or standard assessment procedure calculation process for energy performance, which will be the basis to calculate what is being called total energy performance. And by that, it means that in addition to the target carbon emissions and the building fabric efficiency target, that the current way of showing compliance for a designer of a new house or flat, the designer must also meet a target primary energy rate. And I'll go into detail of that at the next event, but what it's basically saying is you have to factorize the energy demand of the house depending on how much energy it takes to create the final source of energy. So just taking electricity, you look at how that energy is produced and the energy it takes to produce it, and you factor that in to a target. In the case of gas, of course, that has to be processed before it gets down the pipe to the boiler. And again, there is a factor produced that will be plugged into the calculation to determine the primary energy rate of the building. But as I say, more detail on that another day. So please don't ask too many questions on that subject. What else can we expect in the new approved document L? Well, as anybody would have guessed, there's reduced U values for walls, floors, roofs, doors and windows. So that's not only in relation to the notional building that sets the targets for new buildings in the SAP calculation, but also for alterations and extensions to existing buildings. So it's going to be even harder. And, you know, the cavity wall insulation people are going to have to scratch their heads again and come up with new solutions. And we'll have to rewrite our book on U values of elements and solutions for them, which has been much used around the country, but will be obsolete, that will take a bit of work. So apart from that, there'll be tighter targets for air leakage, and because of that, there will be changes to the approved document F dealing with ventilation, so that ventilation is compatible with those more airtight standards, because it's, you know, it's so critical that this doesn't adversely affect indoor air quality, which is poor enough as it is. There's increased heating system efficiency targets and smarter control systems, and that will include mandatory use of independent thermostatic controls in every room, and that will also include existing dwellings where they're being altered, and there's limits on the temperature of primary flow to radiators, etc. So it's sort of tending to steer it towards heat pumps, which are much happier at lower temperature flows, and away from and also towards things like underfloor heating, which do well at lower temperatures. Apart from that, there's an expectation for the incorporation of wastewater heat recovery systems, these clever things where you have a heat exchanger wrapped around the waste pipe from a shower or a bath containing a shower, and that heat exchanger is actually heating the incoming supply water to the shower or to the hot water cylinder. They're actually be built into the notional house that used in the SAP calculation. So, you know, if you don't put them in, you've got to find a way to trade off against them with other efficiencies. So hopefully, there you go. That's a whistle stop tour, and hopefully it's whetted your appetite to sign up for the next webinar covering it in more detail. Quickly, more detailed guidance on approved document F, which covers ventilation, which we're waiting on. So there'll be more detailed guidance on considering external pollution when designing for ventilation in built up areas. No point in having windows and vents and things like that if you're right next to a busy road and you're just going to bring traffic fumes into the property. So nobody's ever going to open those windows. Tighter controls on retrofit work, recognizing how these changes can introduce air quality issues. The simplest one being you change out the windows, you suddenly lose all the infiltration that was occurring in the more drafty older windows, and then you get condensation issues and air quality issues. So it's, you know, tighter controls on providing trickle ventilation and things like that. We're told the guidance will be simpler and unambiguous. Fantastic, hallelujah, because it needed to be. If ever there was an exercise in overcomplicating a simple subject, the old approved document F was that, in my opinion, and some may disagree. Also, we're looking to see mandatory guidance for homeowners on the systems installed. So builders will have to give little manuals to people so that they can use their new homes in a safe, sustainable and healthy way. Very sensible thing. You know, the more complex technology gets in heating systems and ventilation systems, then the greater need for that sort of guidance to be given, so people can use it efficiently. Will all this, you know, resolve the problem of air quality? Air quality has been demonstrated to be generally poor in new homes. Anybody who went to our seminar a few months back on that and the results of research, it was quite clear that the current AD is not doing the job. New homes have a very poor air quality standard, really, even when they are compliant with building regulations. Call me a cynic, I don't know that these changes are going to necessarily resolve those issues. People don't open trickle vents. They switch off their mechanical ventilation at night because they don't like the buzz, it keeps them awake. They're not aware of the invisible pollutants in the air, carbon dioxide, the off-gassing from carpets and furniture, cooking, all those pollutants. You know, you don't see them. So my own view, for what it's worth, and you heard it here, I think that the new environmental sensors that are coming onto the market, I noticed ACO are putting one about. They're a great company producing that sort of alarm and sensor. They've got a sensor that monitors temperature, humidity and CO2. And if you know your CO2 levels, you're probably getting a fair idea of how many of the other pollutants are in the atmosphere as well. And I think if people have got that in their face, that's when they do open the windows, that's when they do turn on the ventilation and use the systems available to them. But there you go. Sorry, a bit of a soapbox moment there, and I'll get back off it and get on with the rest of the webinar, which is not long to go. You might be glad or sad to hear. So as mentioned earlier, there's a new approved document covering overheating that we're going to get. And the idea, we need to design out energy hungry air conditioning systems for summer use. And this is the intention to do it. And how does it do it? Well, it gives provisions for limiting unwanted solar gain. So you're going to get maximum glazed areas, being, we think, 21% of floor area. We're going to get provisions for the removal of excess heat from indoors, so minimum opening areas for windows, so max glazed areas, minimum opening areas. We think that will be around about 12% of floor area. There will be two methods, either a simple method, so a fixed set of design rules, or dynamic thermal assessment and reference to a guidance note. I think it's CIBSE, one of CIBSE guides. I've got it here, TM59, can be used for a dynamic thermal risk assessment to design a building. Again, consideration to external noise and pollution is being addressed, and cross-referencing to approved document F on those topics. Consideration of the security of ground floor windows, cross-referencing to Part Q of the building regulations. Again, people won't open windows to let heat out if it leaves the building insecure and they're not in the building. So strategies to mitigate against that will be covered. Just to let you know, if you're designing in Greater London, the standards will be more onerous. The problems there are seen as needing higher standards or more onerous standards anyway. So you'll be there looking for shading on south facing elevations, looking for designing in overhangs, shutters, reflective glass, things like that, but not in Hertfordshire. And as with ventilation, there are rules on making owners and occupiers aware of how to use the building effectively with these mandatory home user guides. So a good thing, and something we'll have to make sure in our job that they get passed over to owners, get in the habit, and probably ask for a copy of them to be placed on the building control files. So that's me. There's one more slide to go. What I'll do now, if I can give my colleague Simon Hayward the platform to talk about the event that's taking place this year, the Building Futures Conference. Simon, I don't know if Rachel, you could give Simon a voice, and then I'll take any questions to use up the remainder of time if there are any.
Trevor, thank you very much indeed. That was very clear and very helpful. Unfortunately, I can't start my video, which is probably a good thing. But it's nice to see so many people who are on the webinar this afternoon, and thank you all very much for giving up your time. I'm publicising this event. It's the Building Futures Conference, which is next Thursday, the 21st, obviously next week. We are sponsoring it. I think it's one of those events where we're trying to get everyone together, both public and private sector. Looking at the reports by Dame Judith Hackett, she talked about the fact that construction quality had decreased over the last 25 years rather than improved. We've got to stop that, and we've got to make the focus around quality and around compliance. And how we achieve that can't be solved by just one organisation. So hopefully the event on the 21st will raise a good number of questions and hopefully provide one or two answers to those questions, or at least a bit of a route map as to which way we need to go in terms of improving the quality of buildings. There's a great panel of speakers there, as you can see, people like Adney von Bradsky from MHCLG, the ex-head of architecture there. There are public sector people like Sarah Whelan, who will be talking about the Hemel Place strategy, and then various other people from business, people like Mace, who will be talking about SG1. So it should be a really, really good event. SG1, sorry, is the Stevenage Town Centre redevelopment. There will be it should be a really, really good event, and I'd encourage you to attend and be part of the sort of solution that we're looking to find. So that's all from me, Trevor. Back over to you. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, you're afraid to mention some bloke called Simon Hayward will be speaking as well there. So you know, that definitely is a hot ticket not to miss, Simon.
Hopefully speaking a bit more eloquently than I've just done, Trevor. Yeah.
I think you did great. No problem at all. Excellent. Right. Well, I think I'm going to stop sharing now. And yeah, if there are any, Rachel, I don't know if you can monitor if there are any questions that you want to fire with the few minutes remaining.
We've got one question on the Q&A. I don't know if you can see that, Trevor, or do you want me to read it out? I'll read it out for anybody. Have we seen any early indication of what part competent person schemes might play, if any, with respect to their existing self-certification schemes and application to relevant buildings? It could look very onerous to apply to the regulator to replace a consumer unit in an individual flat. On the other hand, if there is still potential to disrupt the golden thread of information, or for contractors to not understand some of the fire safety features of the buildings they're working on. Quite a long one there.
Paul Smith, that could be Paul Smith 1 or Paul Smith 2 or PS1 or PS2, as we like to call them. Both great Hertfordshire well, one's a Hertfordshire surveyor, one's an ex-Hertfordshire surveyor. But anyway, thanks for a difficult question I can't answer, and whichever one I'll find out it is and get you back. No, joking apart, that's a very astute thing to point out. I haven't seen any information on that, and because there is a relevance to just small alterations in high-risk buildings and how that will be regulated. So yeah, whilst I commend the question, I don't have an answer at this stage, and but if we get one, we'll look into it and we'll put it through in the subsequent communication that we send around to everybody. But thanks, yeah, I owe you one.
Yeah, it was PS2. That means I'm
PS2 the same, right? Okay, yeah, I thought it
not PlayStation.
Yeah, yeah, like I say, ex Hertfordshire, and will remain so.
So I've got a question. Oh, here's Angela from County. Is there an option to attend the Hertfordshire Building Futures Conference virtually? I don't think there is, Angela. I think it's tickets only, but I can check and come back to you on that one.
Rachel, they are going to record it and put it online, so there might be that option.
I presume you're hearing that, Angela. So option to view some of the speakers there on a recording.
Yeah, save on a ticket cost. Fine. Is that it? I've got off lightly then, have I? Excellent.
Trevor, there were some questions in chat if you wanted to look at that and,
right,
and follow up on some of those, maybe.
Yeah, if a plot's not started before June 23, it gets caught by the new high requirements. Yes, it does. Yeah, correct. It's an option to attend Hertfordshire Building. We've done that one. I think a lot of these questions have been answered by people in the audience.
Yeah, there's been a bit of chat amongst people. So yeah, that was good.
Doorbells and barbecues, and there you go. Right. Well, rather than go through these, and I will go through them, and we will comprehensively answer anything that's a loose end. I'll leave it at that. I'll just thank you all for turning out. I really hope you enjoyed it, and that as I say, those who have not experienced a Hertfordshire Building Control webinar before are keen to come to another one in the future, and that will be. Have we got a date scheduled, Rachel, or have we got that
the Future Home Standards one? We've got the 24th of November in the diary, so save that date. So that I'll be taking registrations for that very soon. We've just had a quick question in from Mick. Says, do you know if the building safety regulator will absorb the CDM regulations too, or will they sit alongside each other?
As far as I'm aware, they'll sit alongside each other. I don't think there's any talk of them doing the whole both of those elements. But again, watch this space. Like I say, you know, there's so many gaps to fill in that we could only speculate, which doesn't, I can't have an informed opinion until I've been informed. Okay, well, again, thanks for everybody, and hope to see you again. Yeah, that next event will be on Future Home Standard, focusing in on the new approved document and a bit more detail on the changes. And we'll either do just part L, or if we think we can fit it into a useful hour, we'll go into part F as well, and even the overheating approved document. But yeah, what's your emails for Rachel's advertisement of those events, and hopefully hook into them. Anyway, thanks for your time, and we'll see you again soon, I hope. Cheerio.
Thanks.
Cheers.